I think we can just start, Merv.
Okay, sounds good. I think I should introduce myself first. I am Merve Saraç from University of Wisconsin-Madison, and I'm a fourth-year PhD student here. I'm working on specifically test security issues. So we are developing methods, statistical methods to detect pre-knowledge in large-scale, high-stakes testing. And today we will talk about the fourth chapter of the standards. And here is the outline. Today, what is different from the other sessions is we're going to have 5 minutes to write questions down for the expert session, because that's very close next week, next Friday. So we want to get started on putting questions in for the expert session. And the updates. Sergio.
Hello, everybody. So with the update for the group. Well, I mean, there was the results of the voting, and in general, all the proposals that were mentioned in the voting were accepted. So the plan for the next cycle of sessions is going to be to start during February and allow April to be not that packed and have some room for the conference, and then come back after the conference with the rest of the chapters. I am still looking for people to invite, like experts on each chapter. So if you have any ideas, please share that with me. In the form that was shared, there was a section in which some people included some names, but I am needing more names. So if you have that, please let me know. That's it.
Okay, thank you. So let's start checking in. We're going to break into groups, and you can talk about introducing yourself first if you don't know the group members. And let's start the discussion with, have you ever created a test? And if you did, how did you do that? And after having more knowledge of the topic of development and design of the tests, how would you approach the design of that test differently? And we're going to come back in 5 minutes to talk about the chapter briefly.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
I have a question for you before starting, because last session I saw that the recording included this check-in and the group discussion. So I am kind of like how the video was, but I'm not sure if you are okay with recording this part of the meeting.
Sure.
Are you okay? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
So who goes?
I can. Yes, please go.
I just asked a question, who go first?
Okay, I can start first. Yes, so very quickly, my name is Günel. I am from Azerbaijan. I'm a Fulbright student doing my master's at Kent State University. My major is research, measurement, and statistics. So yes, I used to do tests by myself at the university where I used to work. I did mainly English grammar questions, and only after my master's education, now what I'm learning, I remember that I made lots of mistakes with double barrel questions, with unclear instructions, with, I don't know, it was awful. I think my students forgive me. You know, at that time, it was not only me, our administrator would look through those questions and analyze and approve, but still we didn't have such kind of knowledge how to create tests. It's not, I mean, we don't have such kind of faculty, such kind of major. In Azerbaijan, you can be teacher or educational administrator. We don't have any other faculties. So we don't have resources to learn, to observe, to get instructions. That's why. But now I know exactly what it should be, how it should be, and even how to check after first trial, how to check the validity, reliability through IRT, through different programs. So right now I'm thinking I just need time machine to sit and go back to correct my mistakes and come again. Yeah, that is very interesting situation. At least I'm happy that what I know now, I can go and at least explain other teachers, other educators, and maybe in future we will not make such kind of mistakes.
Yeah, it's a great opportunity to reflect on what you did wrong, because you have the power to correct them.
Yes, yes, definitely. Absolutely. Thank you.
How about Ziyin?
I think have the similar experiences with journal. I mean, before I came to the United States, I was a middle school teacher in China. So I need to design a test for my students. And those are the physics questions. So it is very hard to set an anchor items that will be able to measure each of students' ability fairnessly. So that is why I'm so interested about the test fairness and how to make an equity and comparable tests to the students. Now I have been learned the linking and equating and diff. I know they are very useful to measure our service design items, but I have not very professional in this way. So that is what I'm looking for. Okay, go back to introduce myself. I'm Zing. I'm from University of Florida. This is my first time to join with our group. I really thank you, that Scott, because I'm the social code directors in ARA Division D, so I have some work with Scott. And I know that we have a great topic for the standards, so I would like to join with our team. So that's why I emailed Scott, asked him for help, and then luckily I thank you for you give me a chance to join with our team.
Great.
Thanks
Great.
a lot.
I think time is up, Sergio.
Sorry,
Yeah.
what?
It's been 5 minutes.
Oh, yes, yeah. Let me close the rooms. We're going to have 1 minute. Yeah.
Is my screen shared? Do you see my screen share? You do?
No, we don't.
You don't? Thank you for reacting. Just a second. Give me a second. Okay. So it was nice to talk in groups. And now we can talk about the summary of the chapter a little bit. I assume you see the presentation. And Here in this chapter, there were clusters with the main ideas, and I just summarized it with certain steps, and I'm going to have a quick spiel about them. And the purpose of this chapter is to ensure that developers construct tests using planned and documented processes. And these planned and documented processes are incorporating advice from people with diverse but relevant points of view. They could be psychometricians, program administrators, scoring services people, clients, external subject matter experts. And this chapter urges developers to follow procedures for designing tests, supporting fair, accessible, reliable, valid score interpretations for their intended use with the intended population. So developers should work from detailed specifications of the desired test attributes and specifications of major decisions with their justifications about test administration or scoring procedures. They should also use empirical information about item and test quality. They should obtain reviews of their work, and they should evaluate the resulting tests. So much emphasis on the procedures and documentation makes this chapter more about the standards of quality control. And the first point, the first step, is about describing purpose, population, and construct. This is more about test specifications. Here, it is advised that the test developers should obtain or develop documentation related to the intended purposes of the test, the populations of interest, and the constructs to be measured with specific objectives, as known as test blueprints. And also, the developers need to be clear about how they operationalize the construct. The second point is about providing test documentation, which is about test specifications, but also about developing test administration, scoring procedures, and materials. It is expected here that developers should document the desired attributes of the test in a detailed specification manner. And they should document rationales for major decisions about the test, the process used to develop the test, basically. So this goes all the way from including content, skills, knowledge to be measured, the qualifications of the subject matter experts, test length, item format, item order, timing, hardware requirements if it is a digital administration, scoring, score interpretations, administration procedures, and the desired psychometric characteristics of the items and the test as a whole. Third is about writing items and assembling tests. This is straight about the item development. And here, developers should write items that meet specifications and minimize construct irrelevant variants. They should use assembly procedures or write assembly rules, resulting in tests that are meeting these specifications and minimizing construct irrelevant variants. So developers should follow procedures, ensuring the intended interpretations of the test results. And that should be supported for various groups within the intended population of test takers. So they should also evaluate the extent to which the test is representing the defined construct and excluding sources of variance unrelated to the construct. 4 is about obtaining reviews. And this is, again, about cluster 2, but more about the review piece. Developers are expected to obtain internal and external reviews of test specifications, items, assembled tests, and related materials by qualified reviewers. They should also document the purpose of the review, process of reviewing, and the results of the review. Also, they should document the training, qualifications, and relevant attributes of the reviewers themselves. So these reviews covered not only the content accuracy, how items, tasks match to the specifications, but also how the statistical specifications link to the intended interpretations of the test results. Instructions for the test takers, accessibility and fairness for the population groups, appropriateness of presentation, response formats, and difficulty levels. So there goes a lot into this review process. 5 is about pre-testing, and this is, again, about the item development and review. Items should be pre-tested with test takers, representative of the intended population of the test, of course. And the purpose of pre-testing here is to obtain information about the statistical characteristics of the new items. So we want to see if they're adequate for testing. And for pre-testing, developers should document the sampling process and the characteristics of the resulting sample used to evaluate these items. They should also document the statistical procedures they use to evaluate the items and the results of these analyses, including the fit of the model to the data, if that's applicable. And in case pre-testing is not feasible, one can use small-scale pilot tests with small samples, and they can gather collateral information about the items, such as cognition level required to respond to an item, closeness of distractors to the key option, or performance of similar items that were used with similar testing populations before. Evaluating operational tests is about the test revision cluster. And here, developers should evaluate the test performance of the test after the first operational administration with sufficient sample sizes. So this includes the reliability, intercorrelations of the sections or parts, and the indications of speededness, only to name a few. And for some tests, actually, evaluations may require the collection of data over time as the test is being used. And you can think of this with an example. Is there a shift in the ability distribution over time? And if so, we would need to address the concerns about the cut scores. If this is a mastery test, we would probably need to update the cut scores in that case accordingly. And, or another example, is there a decrease in the average response time over time through these multiple test administrations? And we can change the time limits accordingly. 7 is about obtaining periodic reviews, which is also about test revision. And as you can guess, developers are also the maintainers of the test quality. So they should periodically review the test specifications, active items, tests, and the ancillary materials to verify if they continue to be appropriate and if they comply with the current guidelines. They should revise materials, and this should be driven by the reviews by the experts. And they should also notify test takers and test users about any changes that are affecting them based on these reviews. And finally, contributing to the validity argument applies to all the clusters. And developers here should collaborate with researchers, psychometricians in collecting evidence of validity for the validity argument. And much of this evidence in building the validity argument is actually the responsibility of the test developers. Developers should ensure each claim made about the test takers on the basis of the test scores. And they should support this by a cohesive, comprehensive, and convincing validity argument. And all this comes with developers complying with the standards relevant to their work. And this is my summary. And now we're going to go into group discussion and talk about this chapter. What would you change in this chapter if you had something to change? And what would you add to expand more? Or what would you eliminate to focus it more specifically on something? And we're going to have 20 minutes for this, and we'll come back and share the highlights from your groups.
Merve, can you repeat or write in the chat the questions?
Oh, let me go to the chat. What would you add in this chapter to make it more clear, more contemporary? What would you change? Maybe you would reduce some pieces. So what would you do?
Sorry, and I will be taking notes about the discussion in this group in the Envision board.
Thank you, Secretary.
You're welcome.
So, well, it depends. I would say it depends. It depends on the test purpose. I mean, what is your target population? What is the main idea for testing? I'm so sorry, Merve. You mean the chapter or your presentation?
The whole chapter for
Okay.
the standards.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
we're talking, assuming that you have read it already.
Okay.
What did you see any gaps, or did you see any pieces that could get expanded upon?
Let me try to remember something that I would not agree.
So for instance, to me, the administration piece, scoring piece, I think it was also about, what was it? Administration, scoring, procedures. That is already covered in the test administration chapter, for instance, but they were still mentioning it in this chapter. So is this an extra piece there? I was contemplating about including it there or not, but I think it's a good point to emphasize that test administration procedures are also very important procedures that matters to the developers from a developer perspective, because you're developing the test to be used in a certain manner with certain restrictions, and you should be sharing that with the administration rules, scoring rules.
Yeah, definitely, I agree. You know, sometimes it is better to include the same stuff just to remind, just to keep on track. It's fine. I'm just thinking about evaluation, test evaluation. As I remember, there was something new for me. Let me open that chapter one more time.
One thing that I don't think was, well, I was missing. I'm not sure if I missed the part in which it is mentioned. I don't think it is mentioned. Automatic item generation, because it is there. Yeah, I was
very limited though. That was going to be something actually. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, because I'm actually I've been participating recently in a project in which we are writing what is called by some company called Cavian, like smart items, like their kind of commercial name for automatic item generation.
Were you in the conference on test security?
No, but we saw the presentation from the people in Cavion.
Okay.
They kind of presented for us at UMass because we're working
Okay.
together. Yeah. And the thing is that it's tricky. I mean, when you build like a program that generates items, the item development process it's definitely more complicated, and it's it can include like new ways in which you can miss the point in item development. And also it includes extra technical challenges because you don't know how exactly calibrate, for example, an item generator that can have like many ways in which the item can display. And you're not sure if for example, the item parameter will be the same or not. And I mean, there is a lot to say about that. So yeah, maybe I missed where it is like mentioned, but definitely
it is in the test administration piece again.
Okay,
the test
yeah.
administration cluster, the third one. They briefly mention about automated processes there, but I agree with you from both an automated item generation and there's automated distractor generation too, and automated scoring. If you think all of these, and how they're limited to their training sets and everything, I think there is a lot more to caution developers there for the next edition of this chapter.
Yeah.
Right, I totally agree. When we started to this topic, the first thing coming to my mind is the automatic item design, automatic score. It's like everyone now working for it to use the machine learning, data mining to help us design the task. But actually, I took a data mining class in this semester, and I noticed that the natural language processing is very complicated, especially if we didn't very well train the machine to learn the exact meaning for the items, then maybe we may have some bias in the item design if we completely depends on the machine to design the item for us. So that will be a big challenging things we need to be noticed.
Yeah.
And also considering that the technology in general of automatization of many steps in the test development is becoming more popular. And it's also easier. I mean, it's much easier to access to that technology to use, for example, natural language processing to do something about the item, even eventually reviewing. I mean, there has been people that have trying to predict diff, like using natural language processing or stuff like more technical things that you can kind of guess using natural language processing or machine learning that becomes part of the item development cycle, if you want. So yeah, it's tricky.
Yeah, I was thinking like the more we think about the automated processes, they're thinking for large scale tests that are like very standardized and everything, right? But there are also surveys, and like there could be expansions of these automated processes to survey item generation, which are much different than how a multiple choice item stem looks like. So I think there's a lot to say there. We can ask a lot of questions to Alina about this at least.
Yeah, she was a perfection in this area. That is what I'm really looking for to hear her response.
And I'm gonna tell people that let's get back together at 2:40. Is that all right? To talk more as a group.
Yeah, I can broadcast that message if you need.
Oh, okay, you can write it if you want.
Yeah.
Let me do it. I'll do it.
Can you do that?
I'm texting everybody.
Okay. Yeah. Another thing that I'm not sure if I am understanding the difference between purpose and intended use. I didn't get that. What's the difference between a purpose and an intended use? Because for me, a purpose is like an intention about how do you want to use. So that's an intended use or not. I'm at lost. I'm a bit lost.
Yeah, that is interesting point. Maybe it depends on the field. For medical tests, it can be slightly different, but they are almost like synonyms. I don't know. For STEM fields, like very specific physics, chemistry, medicine, it can be slightly different. I don't know. It depends on situation. You said purpose and
Intended use. Do you have an idea
intended
of
use.
how they could be different or?
Purpose. Well, if you have purpose, it's also intention.
I think I can maybe give an example to this.
Yeah.
So there's this language proficiency test in Turkey. I'm from Turkey. And this language proficiency test has intervals of different levels of proficiency. But some institutions are using this test by using certain cut scores, not the others. And some institutions are using for higher education administration some other levels. So I think you create the test with the purpose of measuring the language proficiency, but how different institutions like the for instance, the NASA example in Turkey is using it with different cut scores, for instance, for different purposes, or in higher education again for grad school. It changes from school to school what is the cut score they are using, but they're using the same test. So how are they really deciding what intention in terms of mastery? If they're below 80 out of the 100, they're not mastering this proficiency skill for one institution, but it's 60 for another institution. So the intended use might be different for institutions, I guess, even though you create the test for measuring the proficiency of language.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
So purpose would be like a family of intended uses that share some similarity. So the
exactly
purpose of having a cut score might be the purpose, but the specific cut score that you're using on each context, that might be the intended use, that understanding the use of the specific instance in which you are using the score.
Exactly. Yeah. One is more about how you're developing with that purpose. The other is who are using the test for what intention.
Okay.
It's a little, I think it's a little confusing too. You're right. And this is just one example that I can think of. So
yeah. The word use in general, for me, it's tricky. It can be interpreted in so many ways. And there's all these layers, like a general purpose and a specific procedure that you're doing. Like, there are like many
You're
levels.
Right. Another example could be this, for instance, SAT scores are used for predicting GPAs and all, right, in some institutions. But some institutions are, instead of predicting it, they're putting certain cut scores again. So some are using it for prediction purposes. Some are using it for like eliminating students that are below a certain level. So it's like you create the SAT, but they're using it for different intentions.
That in the example that you gave, Merve, first example is like a little bit different. I think like purpose, you said the purpose and maybe different targets, different population. For example, in Azerbaijan, we also have general tests for teachers, but it differs for the city. Cut scores differ for the city and for the districts. Of course, city teachers are more trained, but district teachers are not so well prepared. The cut scores are different. I don't know. But the second example, yes, with SAT, yeah, it can be. It depends on the college, university.
Yeah, if it is the predictive power or something else as a criteria, you know?
Yeah, definitely.
But still, from how it is written in the standards, I'm not sure what's the difference at the end. Because, for example, at some point they speak about specification of intended use will include an indication of whether the test score interpretation will be primarily norm reference or criterion reference. So that for me is more like a generic use. That for me would be a purpose, or relate with a more like a family of specific uses. But still they are using the expression intended use. So that's kind of make me confused, like how general is the concept of intended uses, or how specific it is. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a good question to raise for the next edition too. They can be more distinctive about those two things. Let's get back together as a whole group. Thank you.
Thank you.
Was it just the two of you, Maggie and Madeline, in that other group?
No, we had Debbie also, but it was like there was a countdown going and it had 50 seconds left or something, and then we came back. Okay, there's Debbie. So I don't know if that messed her up.
And I think Kimberly had to leave, right?
She did.
Yeah.
Okay. So we can talk about highlights from groups.
Let me see. I'm finishing the last thought we had. Hold on.
Okay.
Then we can share.
Yep.
Okay, so we were group one. It was Maggie, me, Debbie, and Kimberly before she left. And so we started with responding to someone's discussion question about what the difference between purpose and intended use are. And we didn't really cover any kind of definitions, just more of a discussion about whether they should be more separated or more detailed in the standards. And then we discussed a little bit about kind of having guidelines for the documentation. You know, it talks a lot about document this, document that, but kind of we thought about maybe a template, even like what does a documentation look like? Is this a paper that's detailing all this stuff, or is it more of figures and tables? Like what are the options for these sorts of documentations? We talked a bit too about subject matter experts, and that some of us had read papers that didn't do a good job of really describing the qualifications of these experts, and that maybe there could be more of a standardized or some way to make it a more common practice that's not just reported in, you know, like large scale alignment studies. And that these shouldn't just be content experts, but they're, you know, we need to make sure that these include, and the standards mention this a little bit, but including bias and sensitivity reviewers too, like people who are there to represent different groups of people to make sure that bias and sensitivity issues are being acknowledged. We talked about the test sample. It says you want a representative sample to administer your test to, but we talked about how that so rarely happens, that you read all these studies and said we did our best to get a representative sample, but it's not really representative, but use our test anyway, and here's how you'll use it for the sample that we wanted it to be for. And so there's a real problem with that, about how in reality we can't really get as representative of a sample as we would want. And so what is representative enough? When is it okay to just go with the sample you have and still make the claims about the test that you want to make? We all agreed or I think we all agreed, we all talked about how this chapter seemed to be a little bit more straightforward in terms of there's not as much room for debate or controversy about things, and because it's more of like a checklist of physical things that need to be there. And so that kind of makes it you know, more straightforward. And Kimberly used the words what the standards are intending to do. this chapter kind of embodies that. We had two more main topics. We talked about CAT, computerized adaptive testing, and how it's mentioned a few times in these standards in this chapter. But there is kind of an issue with public distrust of computerized algorithms and how the standards could include more details about what needs to be documented about computerized adaptive testing to make it more user-friendly and more accessible to the public to kind of improve trust and just make sure that people understand what's going on, which kind of brings up the last topic that we talked about too, which is the different levels of documentation, who has access to that, because it's important to disclose information that, you know, about the test, like the adaptive algorithm or your psychometric model, but you still need to maintain the integrity of the test. You can't, you know, disclose the equation you're using for your psychometric model, but, you know, what information do they want to know? Do they want to know the family of models or the specific type of model without the equation? Like what level of detail and who has access to that level of detail is important. So that was a lot, but that was the gist of our conversation.
They're great. A few of them overlap with what we thought too. Like, what's the difference between purpose and the intended use? Like, should that be more distinctive? It's from our group, Dinar or Zine. You want to talk about the highlights from our group?
I'm sorry, did you call me or?
Oh no, Gunal or Zine.
Oh, yes, yes.
Oh, I'm afraid I will miss some important stuff. Sergio took notes, but as far as I remember, we discussed. Well, I will start from the ending. We discussed Sergio's question about. Sergio, help me about intention and purpose in testing. Are they different or are they vary? And if they vary, at what points? Merve tried to give a couple examples. And by the way, girls, maybe you have any ideas about that. It would be interesting to hear from you. The purpose and intention of the testing. And what else did we discuss? Zing, maybe you can help me.
Sure. We're also talking about the automatic score because they're in the standard. I think it's located at the chapter 4.19. It's talking about the automatic item score. And now it's a very popular method that we try to use this method in the survey, in the test design. But we are discuss our confusion about how to scoring them and the test assembling item generations, especially this method depends on the machine learning and natural language processing. So it really depends on how we change the machine to learn the meaning of the items. That is our confusion. And the purpose of the test design item used in our I should say how we determine our purpose and intended use for a test. So we discuss more in the college and university because they're using the same test, but they have different cut-off line to make the students registration. That is also another topic that we discussion about it. Then we finally talking about the test evaluation. I didn't remember the test evaluation discussion in the very beginning. So if anyone would like to add in, that will be helpful. Oh, I forgot. I didn't open my video. So sorry about that. Talking a lot.
That's okay. I don't recall what we talked about test evaluation either. Do you have an idea, Sergio? You were the one taking the notes.
Sorry about that. But I think you mentioned something that there was some aspect of the chapter that were mentioned in another chapter.
Like the test administration and scoring procedures piece, the cluster there is actually a lot of the things that overlap with the separate chapter of test administration and scoring. So I was thinking if that's really necessary to include it in development. But if we think of this development chapter as the test quality control, the overall guidelines with the standards, I think it should be included and be there. Should it be more expanded? I think that should go into the next chapter, which we're going to discuss next. And I was also going to add something about the automated procedures. So this standards is, the audience for the standards is really diverse, right? Psychological testing, educational measurement, and this like practitioners, program evaluators, everybody's looking at this. If you're using automated processes, which many of these audience is not very familiar with, right? How are we going to communicate all these natural language processing approaches, all these algorithms, and how they could work, they should work, if they should be used by the developers in a more accessible language for these people, you know, for this diverse group of people? How can we make this technical detail, which is really important during the development, more accessible to this group of audience, basically? And there is also a piece about that I came to just remember. We are talking mostly about automated, not automated tests. In this chapter, we're talking about large-scale tests, standardized tests, kind of. Then they are talking about developing. How does this work with the survey development in particular? You know, if we're going to use certain approaches like the automated processes, how are we going to use those for like sample survey creation and basically creating the surveys? So I think that could also speak to the accessibility for different groups of audience too, because it's not just the multiple choice standardized tests, it's also the surveys, which are much different in how they look as the stem from other tests.
Yeah, one other comment that we mentioned in the discussion is that in general, technologies for automatization are more available now. So, I mean, they are more used and also easier to use or easier to implement. So, even more reasons to include that in more detail in the future of the standards, because it's going to be like more and more.
And you know what that also makes me think? Because it's so accessible for use, and like everything's out there, the code and everything, but does it really make sense to use those for certain contexts? So how can we caution that these methods that do not apply to certain contexts over the other? Like, can we caution the audience in that regard in some aspects that, okay, this is accessible doesn't mean that you have to use it for that context?
Yes.
We can go ahead and write questions for Alina too in the Envision board. Again, we are doing it differently today because we have a short time frame to meet her.
Everybody here knows how to use the Envision board? Anybody?
I'm seeing notes. Yeah.
I'm on there, but I would not say I know how to use it. Take notes, but barely.
I will copy the link anyway in the chat if you don't have it, just in case.
And me too, it's just the sticker and the text for me. I can't even look it. There's an option to look it.
And also, if you can put reactions and likes, that will be better. That will be very useful too, because that helps a lot to guide the priority of the questions. Do you know how to do that? You need to click on the smiley reaction button, and then your mouse will have like a smiley face. And if you click in the vision board, then you will see will appear like a menu with different emojis that you can put. So now I'll put like a party thing.
That's kind of nice. Zine, this is your first time in the discussion groups, right? So Sergio, just share the link in the chat to the InVision board. And you can put your questions there too. Like they're moving around right now. I mean, you highlighted a lot of great stuff, Maggie and Madeline and Debbie's group. We can ask a lot of questions on those. And definitely the automation process, because Alina is the person who is on this, which we can call maybe modern test development. Great. I think we can work more over this. Gunel is just exploring around. We see your art there. We can,
Sorry.
that's okay. That was nice. I think we can continue to put down questions, and Sergio is going to share the link again for others to address some questions too. It's going to be a really interesting discussion next week, so I'm looking forward to it. And thanks for participating today, taking the time being here and critically thinking about what should be included next.
Thank you, Mary.
And have a wonderful weekend. Thank you so much, Sergio, for your help with everything.
Yeah, thank you, Mary, for hosting today. And yeah, we committed with Alina to deliver some questions on Monday, so I will send an email explaining that, so you can keep like writing questions and putting likes and stuff like that.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Bye.
Bye. Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye bye. Thank you.
Bye.